What if the hardest part of love isn't falling in love, but finding the strength to keep it alive when everything you believe gets tested? Join us on this story of Sarah and James. In part 1, just moments before saying, "I do," James revealed a shocking secret. He wasn't really disabled and had been pretending to test if someone could love him for who he truly was. Now, in this second part, as they navigate life after the wedding, Sarah and James will face new trials that will either deepen their bond or threaten to break it once more. Are they strong enough to build a future together? Keep watching to find out. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers around the world. Let's begin. The honeymoon was magical, an escape to a quiet, sun-drenched island where Sarah and James laughed, explored, and shared promises of forever. For those blissful weeks, everything felt simple, wrapped in a dreamy haze of love and excitement. They returned home, hand in hand, brimming with plans for the life they would build together. The bags still sat unpacked in the hallway as they embraced their new life as husband and wife, ready to create their cozy little world. But as the days turned into weeks, the rhythm of daily life began to settle in, and with it came the reality of living together, of intertwining routines, and of learning each other's quirks in a shared space. James, as eager and attentive as ever, adjusted quickly, moving through the home with a newfound freedom and confidence that Sarah hadn't fully processed. It was strange seeing him so active, without the reliance on a wheelchair she had grown accustomed to. Small things, like the way he swiftly moved around the kitchen or ran up the stairs 2 at a time, caught her off guard, like tiny reminders of the secret he had kept for so long. Sarah couldn't help but feel a flicker of uncertainty each time one of these moments happened. She wanted to be completely comfortable, to fully trust him, but she found herself hesitating. Could she really let her guard down completely? One evening, while they were unpacking dishes into the kitchen cabinets, she found herself watching him, noticing how easily he reached for things on the high shelves, how swiftly he moved. There was a lightness in his step, a confidence that came with the physical freedom she hadn't fully adjusted to. She realized she had held onto an image of him, a softer, more dependent image that didn't quite match the man in front of her now. James's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She blinked, realizing he had asked her a question. "Oh, sorry," she said, giving a small smile. "I was just thinking." He chuckled, reaching out to touch her arm. "You're thinking too hard, Mrs. Taylor." His eyes sparkled with the same warmth that had drawn her to him in the first place. "Maybe," she replied, forcing herself to smile back, but her mind wandered. She couldn't shake the thought. How much else about him would she need to relearn? Was it possible that there were still parts of him hidden away, pieces of himself he hadn't shared? Their routines took on a rhythm, though. James was an early riser, often out for a jog around the neighborhood before breakfast. He would come back energized, chatting about everything he had seen and the neighbors he had met. Sarah enjoyed listening to him talk, his enthusiasm infectious, but she often felt like she was watching from the outside, trying to reconcile this man with the one she had married. Sometimes, the unease would creep in unexpectedly. One morning, she woke up to find James gone. A note on his pillow. "Went out for a quick run. Be back soon. Love you." She held the note in her hand, reading it over and over, her mind racing. The man she married, she reminded herself, had kept a part of his life hidden from her. What if he was still hiding something? The thought lingered in the back of her mind, casting a small shadow over the warm glow of their newlywed bliss. Later that day, while preparing dinner together, she decided to confront it, at least in a small way. "Do you ever miss the way things used to be?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. James looked up, his expression thoughtful. "What do you mean?" he asked, a hint of confusion in his eyes. "Well," she hesitated, choosing her words. "When we met, you were more limited. Does it ever feel strange, being so active now?" He paused, glancing down at the vegetables he was chopping. For a moment, she saw a flicker of discomfort on his face, but he quickly replaced it with a reassuring smile. "I guess sometimes," he admitted. "But it's freeing too. For the first time, I feel like I can really be myself with you." Her heart twisted at his words. She knew he meant well, but that word freeing hit a nerve. What did it mean to be free in a marriage built on a lie? She wanted to be happy for him, to share his excitement. But instead, a wave of resentment surged within her. She had fallen in love with a version of him that didn't exist, and now she was left trying to adjust to the truth. It felt like a betrayal all over again. "I'm glad you feel that way," she replied softly, her voice strained, hoping he wouldn't notice the tension in her tone. James looked at her, concern shadowing his eyes. "Sarah, are you okay?" She forced a smile, brushing her hand against his arm. "Of course. Just tired, I guess. It's been a busy few weeks." He didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded, turning back to the cutting board. They finished dinner in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. In bed that night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She wanted to let go of her fears, to trust him completely, but doubt clung to her like a shadow. She remembered the early days of their relationship, when he had been so kind, so attentive, someone she could rely on. But now, every time she looked at him, she was reminded of the deception, and she wondered if she could ever truly forgive him. The days turned into weeks, and slowly they settled into a routine. They laughed together, shared stories about their days, and spent quiet moments curled up on the couch, enjoying each other's company. But the lingering distrust gnawed at Sarah, a wound that hadn't fully healed. She wondered if she would ever be able to let it go, to see James without questioning his every move. One evening, after a particularly tense day, James pulled her aside. "Sarah," he said gently, taking her hands in his. "I know things haven't been easy since the wedding. I know there's still a lot I need to make up for. But I want you to know that I love you, more than anything. And I'll keep proving that to you, no matter how long it takes." His words melted some of the ice around her heart, and she felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move past this. She looked up at him, her heart aching with the mixture of love and lingering hurt that had become all too familiar. "I love you too, James," she whispered, her voice filled with vulnerability. "But it's going to take time. I'm trying. I really am." He nodded, his expression understanding. "I know. And I'm here, for however long it takes." They held each other in the quiet of their home, the warmth of their embrace a small comfort in the midst of their uncertainty. It wasn't perfect, and there were still wounds to heal, but in that moment, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope, a small reminder of why she had fallen in love with James in the first place. Sarah glanced at the clock for the third time, her fingers tracing the empty rim of her coffee cup. It was nearly midnight, and James still wasn't home. The rhythmic hum of the dishwasher filled the silence as she sat alone in their kitchen, her thoughts spinning. This wasn't the first night he'd been late. Far from it. Lately, work seemed to swallow him whole, and the man she married felt like he was slipping further away with every passing day. She sighed, remembering the early days of their marriage. When they had just moved in together, James would come home every evening with stories to share, his enthusiasm as infectious as ever. They would talk for hours, laughing over little things, feeling like they were each other's entire world. But now, with James's growing business responsibilities, their once frequent talks had dwindled to quick updates and the occasional exhausted good night before he collapsed into bed. The sound of the garage door finally pulled her from her thoughts. She stood up, her heart racing with a mixture of relief and frustration. When James walked in, his tie slightly loosened and a weary smile on his face. She tried to muster a smile, but the nagging ache of loneliness held her back. "Hey," he greeted softly, crossing the kitchen to give her a hug. She melted into his embrace, grateful for the warmth, but a part of her still felt distant. "Long day?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. James nodded, rubbing his temples. Yeah, there was a last-minute issue with a client. I'm sorry I'm so late, Sarah. I missed you. He kissed her on the forehead, and she felt the familiar flutter in her chest, but it was tempered by the heaviness that had taken root there. They settled at the table, and James began talking about his day, the challenges, and the excitement of a potential new partnership. Sarah listened, nodding along, but her thoughts wandered. His voice faded into the background as she looked at him. This was the man she loved, but lately he felt like a stranger, a shadow who passed through their home on his way to somewhere else. James, she said finally, interrupting him. Do you ever feel like we're not spending enough time together? He paused, surprised by her question. What do you mean? He asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. We're together now, aren't we? She forced a small smile. Yes, but you're always working, or traveling, or in meetings. I barely see you anymore. He sighed, reaching for her hand. I know it's been a lot, Sarah, but I'm doing this for us, for our future. You know how much this business means to me. She pulled her hand back, not in anger, but in a moment of vulnerability. I know, James, I do. But sometimes I just feel alone, like I'm not part of this future you're building. James looked at her, his expression softened, but there was a hint of guilt in his eyes. Sarah, he said slowly, I didn't know you felt that way. I just thought you understood. This business, it's not just for me. It's for us, for our family. I want to give you everything you've ever dreamed of. She looked down, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. What I dreamed of, James, was a life with you. A life where we share things together, not just pass each other in the hallways of our own home. James's face fell, and he reached across the table to take her hand again. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't realize I was making you feel this way. I don't want you to feel neglected. I'll try to be here more often, I promise. But promises, she knew, could be fragile things. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he would find a way to balance his work with their marriage. But doubt clung to her like a shadow. She had already been hurt once by his secrecy, and now this growing distance felt like another betrayal, a reminder of the barriers that seemed to keep creeping up between them. Over the next few days, James made an effort. He came home earlier, spent more time with her, and even helped with things around the house. They would go for evening walks, sharing bits of their day like they used to. For a while, it felt like they were back to those early days of their marriage. Sarah allowed herself to relax, to let go of her fears and enjoy the warmth of his presence. But it didn't last. One night, as they were watching a movie, James's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face immediately clouding with concern. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said, standing up. I need to take this. It's work. She watched him step out of the room, her heart sinking. Minutes turned to hours, and by the time he returned, she was already in bed, feigning sleep. The pattern repeated, small promises, followed by broken ones, each time leaving her feeling more distant and alone. The loneliness began to settle deep within her. She found herself counting the hours between his texts, hoping for one that said he'd be home early, dreading the ones that said he'd be late. She missed him, missed the way they used to be. But now, it felt like he was slipping away, like his ambition had become a wall between them. One evening, while she was making dinner, James walked in, suitcase in hand. Sarah, I have to fly out tomorrow for a last-minute business trip, he said, his tone apologetic. Her heart sank. Again? She asked, trying to hide the disappointment in her voice. He nodded, looking at her with guilt in his eyes. I know it's a lot, but this deal could change everything for us. Just a few days, and then I'll be back. I promise. The words sounded hollow, the promises empty. She forced a smile, nodding in resignation. Okay. Be safe, she whispered, knowing that arguing would only make things worse. As she watched him pack, she felt a wave of sadness wash over her. This wasn't the life she had imagined, a life where she felt like a background character in his story. She wanted to be his partner, his equal, not someone he came home to only when it was convenient. That night, as she lay alone in bed, she realized just how much she missed him, not just his presence, but the closeness they once shared. She missed the man who had once put her first, who had made her feel like the center of his world. The loneliness grew heavier, an ache that she carried with her throughout the days he was gone. She knew he loved her, but love, she realized, wasn't always enough. She needed more. She needed him to be fully present and there. And as she lay awake, staring at the empty side of the bed, she began to wonder if he would ever be able to give her that. The morning started like any other. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing coffee, while James was out on his regular morning jog. She glanced out the window, smiling as she imagined him running through the neighborhood, greeting neighbors with his usual energy. It was a small comfort in her routine, watching him do something he enjoyed, something that brought him peace amidst the chaos of his career. But as she poured the coffee, her phone rang. She almost ignored it, expecting a spam call, but something made her check. It was an unknown number, but as soon as she answered, she recognized her neighbor's voice. "Sarah, it's Mrs. Lee. I just saw James collapse down by the park. The ambulance is on its way." Her heart stopped. The words barely registered as she fumbled to grab her keys, bolting out of the house and down the street to the park. When she arrived, paramedics were already lifting James onto a stretcher, his face pale, his eyes half closed. She gasped, feeling an intense wave of fear and helplessness. "James," she called, rushing over to him, clutching his hand. His fingers felt cold, limp in her grasp. He managed a faint, reassuring smile before the paramedics began moving him into the ambulance. "Please, come with us," one of them said, and she quickly climbed in beside him, holding his hand tightly the entire way. The ride to the hospital felt like an eternity, her mind racing with every terrifying possibility. James had always been fit and healthy. How could this be happening? At the hospital, she was asked to wait outside while the doctors examined him. The minutes stretched on like hours, the sterile, bright hallway closing in on her as fear gnawed at her mind. Her heart raced, and a deep-rooted fear she had buried long ago began to surface, a fear that she might lose him. She had fallen in love with a man who had once feigned disability, a man who had pushed her trust to its limits. And now, here she was, helpless and unsure if she was prepared to confront this new reality. Finally, a doctor emerged, her expression calm yet serious. "Mrs. Taylor, your husband experienced a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke. He's stable, but he'll need close monitoring and physical therapy to regain his full strength." Sarah's relief was immediate, but it was mixed with an unsettling fear. Will he be okay? With time and proper care, yes, the doctor assured her. But he'll need rest, and there may be some temporary limitations in his mobility. The word limitations echoed in Sarah's mind, bringing back memories of their early days together. It felt like life had twisted in a painful irony. She had always loved him for his strength and independence, but now he would need her support in ways she hadn't anticipated. When she finally went in to see him, James lay in the hospital bed, looking frail and vulnerable in a way she had never seen. His eyes met hers, filled with apology and frustration. She sat beside him, taking his hand, her heart heavy with both relief and uncertainty. "Sarah," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry." She squeezed his hand, willing herself to be strong for him. "There's nothing to be sorry about, James. You just need to rest and get better." He closed his eyes, letting out a weary sigh. "I hate this. I hate feeling like I can't do anything. I never wanted you to see me like this." A lump formed in her throat, but she forced a reassuring smile. "We'll get through this together. I'm here for you, James. I always will be." The days that followed were difficult. James was discharged but required constant care. Simple tasks, standing up, walking to the bathroom, even eating, became challenges. Sarah found herself in the role of caregiver, helping him with everything, from managing medications to assisting him with exercises. She prepared his meals, rearranged their home to make things more accessible, and adapted her schedule to be by his side. But as time went on, the strain began to weigh on her. She hadn't realized how exhausting it would be to care for him, both physically and emotionally. She missed the ease of their previous life, when James had been the strong, active partner she had fallen in love with. Now, she watched him struggle, his frustration often turning into silence or flashes of irritation. She knew it wasn't easy for him, but she couldn't help feeling isolated, her own needs pushed aside. One night, as she was helping him to bed, James looked at her, his expression somber. "Sarah, I know this isn't what you signed up for. I feel like I'm a burden to you." She stopped, her heart aching at his words. "James, you're not a burden," she said firmly, though a small part of her wondered if she was trying to convince herself as much as him. "We're in this together. For better or worse, remember." His face softened, but his eyes held a sadness that broke her heart. "I know, but it's hard. I feel trapped. And I hate seeing you like this, having to do everything for me." She took a deep breath, grappling with her own tangled emotions. "I just wish things were easier," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat in silence, both weighed down by the reality they faced. She wanted to be the strong, supportive wife, the one who could rise above her fears and insecurities. But the situation had brought out her own vulnerabilities, the same trust issues that had plagued her since the day she discovered his secret. Now, in the face of this real crisis, she found herself questioning if she had the strength to be there for him as fully as she wanted. One afternoon, while helping him with his physical therapy exercises, she saw the strain on his face as he pushed through each movement. He was determined, but she could see the frustration in every furrowed brow, every clenched fist. When he finally finished, he leaned back, panting, and looked up at her with tired eyes. "Sarah, you don't have to stay here all the time. I know you have a life, too. You don't have to put everything on hold for me." Her heart ached at his words. She wanted to tell him that she was happy to help, that this was her choice. But a part of her felt the weight of it, the lost time, the missed opportunities, the sacrifice she hadn't anticipated. And yet, in his vulnerability, she saw the man she loved, the one who had always been there for her, the one who had promised her forever. "James," she said softly, kneeling beside him, "I chose to be with you, no matter what. We'll get through this together. I won't leave you just because things are hard." He reached out, taking her hand, his grip weaker than she remembered but filled with determination. "Thank you, Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." In that moment, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder of why she had married him in the first place. Yes, their journey had taken an unexpected turn, and yes, it was hard, harder than she had ever imagined. But she knew that her love for him was real, stronger than any of the doubts and fears that had once held her back. As she looked into his eyes, she made a silent promise to stand by him, to be his strength when he needed it, and to love him through every challenge life would throw their way. For better or worse, she was his, and he was hers, and together, they would face whatever came next. The months after James's health scare became a quiet, steady chapter in Sarah and James's marriage. They moved at a slower pace, no longer rushing from one task to the next, and instead savoring each day. It was a calm after a storm, a fragile but welcome peace that both clung to with gratitude. As James grew stronger, he and Sarah talked about the future in a way they hadn't before. His illness had forced them to reevaluate their priorities, and they agreed it was time to make some changes. One of the first things they decided was to set boundaries with work. No more late-night calls, no more canceled dinners, and no more sacrificing weekends for endless business trips. They wanted to spend more time together, truly together, without work intruding on their personal lives. One evening, As they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James took Sarah's hand. His eyes filled with a sincerity she hadn't seen in a long time. "I don't want to go back to the way things were," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "All of this has made me realize how much I was missing, and I don't want us to drift apart again." Sarah squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and hope. "I don't want that either," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I want us to be a team, not just people sharing a house. I need to know I'm as important to you as your work." James nodded, looking down as he took a deep breath. "I think I got caught up in proving something. Proving I could succeed, that I was worth loving, I guess." He paused, meeting her gaze, and she could see the vulnerability there. "Maybe a part of me thought I had to keep achieving to deserve you." The words struck Sarah deeply. She had known James as confident, even a little guarded, but she hadn't realized the extent of his insecurities. His deception early in their relationship, and even his intense drive to succeed, suddenly made more sense. She felt a mix of empathy and sadness, realizing how much he had been carrying, even before they met. "You don't have to prove anything to me, James," she said gently, touching his cheek. "I fell in love with you, not what you did or didn't do. I know I was hurt by the lie, but I want to move past that. I don't want to keep carrying it." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes as if soaking in her words. "I don't deserve you, Sarah," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. She gave a small smile, brushing a tear from his cheek. "Maybe you don't," she teased lightly, "but I'm keeping you anyway." They both laughed, the tension easing as they held each other, feeling the weight of the past start to lift. With their renewed focus on each other, they began setting aside time each week just for themselves. They took long walks, tried new restaurants, and spent lazy Sundays reading or watching movies. It was as if they were rediscovering each other, learning to appreciate the small, quiet moments they had once overlooked. They even started cooking together, a simple activity that quickly became a source of laughter and connection. Neither was particularly skilled in the kitchen, and their attempts often ended in comical failures. But they loved it. In this season of rebuilding, Sarah felt a desire to rediscover herself too. She realized that she had spent so much time focusing on their marriage and supporting James that she had lost touch with her own passions. Inspired by the creativity she had once loved, she decided to take up painting, something she hadn't done since college. At first, she was nervous, unsure if she still had any talent, but as she dipped her brush into the vibrant colors, she felt a familiar joy bubbling up. She set up a small corner in the spare room, transforming it into her personal studio. Hours would pass as she worked, lost in the blend of colors and textures. Painting became her refuge, a way to connect with herself, and it filled her with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in a long time. James noticed the change in her, how the light in her eyes seemed brighter, her laughter more frequent. One day, as she was working on a landscape painting, he walked into her makeshift studio and watched her for a while. She looked up, surprised to find him standing there, his expression one of quiet admiration. "You're really good," he said softly, stepping closer to admire the work. "Why didn't you ever tell me you could paint like this?" She smiled, feeling a little shy. "I guess I just forgot how much I loved it." He placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'm glad you're doing this. You deserve something just for you." His words warmed her heart. It felt like they were truly partners now, supporting each other's growth, not only as a couple but as individuals. She realized that this was what she had always wanted, a relationship where they could both thrive, together and apart. As the months passed, the lines of communication between them grew stronger. They were more honest with each other, sharing their thoughts and fears without holding back. They had difficult conversations too, about James's past deception, about her lingering insecurities, and the challenges they had faced in those first years of marriage. Sometimes the conversations were painful, but each one brought them closer, stripping away the layers of hurt and misunderstanding until only love and understanding remained. Their renewed connection wasn't without its challenges, but Sarah felt stronger and more resilient than ever. She knew that their marriage wasn't perfect. There would always be obstacles and moments of doubt, but she also knew that they were committed to facing them together, to being there for each other no matter what. She had learned to let go of the fear that had once haunted her, to trust that they could overcome whatever life threw at them. One day, as they were walking hand in hand through a local art fair, James looked at her, a mischievous grin on his face. "So, Mrs. Taylor, are you going to start selling those paintings of yours?" She laughed, nudging him playfully. "Maybe someday. For now, they're just for us." He pulled her close, planting a kiss on her forehead. "Well, I'm proud of you, Sarah, for everything." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. "And I'm proud of us, James. We've come a long way." As they continued strolling through the fair, Sarah felt a quiet contentment settle over her. She knew that life would continue to have its ups and downs, that there would be moments of struggle and hardship, but she also knew that she and James had built a foundation strong enough to withstand it all. They were no longer the couple they had been on their wedding day, blinded by expectations and hidden fears. They were something stronger, something deeper. They were partners, friends, and soulmates, bound together not by perfection, but by the shared journey they had taken, a journey that had tested them in ways they hadn't anticipated. And as they walked side by side, Sarah felt a renewed sense of peace, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning of their first wedding anniversary dawned quietly, the golden light filtering through the curtains and filling the room with a soft warmth. Sarah stirred, blinking sleepily as she felt James's arm around her, his steady breathing a comfort she had come to cherish more than anything. A year ago, they had stood at the altar, saying vows that felt so simple and certain. Since then, they had walked through fire and storm together, and now they were here, older, wiser, and somehow more in love than ever. James shifted beside her, his eyes slowly opening to meet hers, a sleepy smile tugging at his lips. "Good morning, Mrs. Taylor," he whispered, his voice still husky with sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Taylor," she replied, her heart swelling with affection. She traced her fingers along his cheek, marveling at how their love had transformed and grown. She could feel the weight of the past year in his eyes, the struggles they'd overcome, the trust they'd rebuilt, and the quiet peace they'd found in each other's arms. "Do you remember how nervous we were a year ago?" he asked, a hint of laughter in his voice. She laughed softly, nodding. "I thought my heart was going to beat out of my chest walking down that aisle." They lay there for a moment, both lost in the memory of that day, of the uncertainty and excitement they'd felt standing before each other and promising forever. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet the memory was as vivid as ever. They had been tested in ways they could never have imagined, but here they were, still together, stronger for all the hardship they'd faced. After breakfast, James surprised Sarah by taking her on a walk to a small park they'd often visited in their early days of dating. He had packed a basket with their favorite snacks, and together they found a quiet spot beneath a tree, surrounded by the gentle sounds of birdsong and the rustling of leaves. They spread out a blanket and sat down, sharing bites of fruit and laughing as they reminisced about the past year, the good, the difficult, and everything in between. As the sun reached its peak, James took her hand, his expression turning serious. "Sarah," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "I want you to know that this past year has taught me so much about what it means to truly love someone. I'm not the man I was when we got married. I'm better because of you." She felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "James, we've both grown. And I wouldn't trade a single moment of it, even the hard ones." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "When I think about all the mistakes I made, all the ways I let you down, I realize now that every misstep brought me closer to truly understanding what it means to love you." He paused, taking a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "You've taught me patience, trust, and the power of forgiveness. You've shown me that love isn't something we have to earn. It's a gift, one I'll spend my life honoring." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she listened, her heart overflowing with love for the man before her. She had never doubted that he loved her, but hearing his words, knowing the journey they had been on, filled her with a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. "James," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, "I've had my own struggles, my own doubts. But every day, you've shown me that love is worth fighting for. Even when things were hard, even when I felt alone, I knew we'd find our way back to each other. And here we are." They sat in silence for a moment, both overwhelmed by the weight of their words, by the memories and emotions they shared. Then, almost instinctively, they stood up, facing each other, hands clasped tightly. The park around them faded, leaving only the two of them, as if they were alone in their own world. "Sarah," James said, his voice steady and clear, "I promise to love you, to honor you, and to cherish you every day of my life. I promise to never forget the lessons we've learned together, and to always make you my priority. I promise to be honest, to be present, and to give you the best of myself, now and forever." Her tears spilled over as she listened, each word a balm to her heart. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath, feeling the depth of her love for him filling her with strength. "James, I promise to love you without hesitation, to trust you, and to stand by you no matter what life brings. I promise to forgive, to grow with you, and to find joy in the smallest moments. I vow to be your partner, your friend, and your greatest support, today, and for all our days." As they finished, they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, the warmth of their promises settling around them like a soft blanket. They were no longer the couple who had stood at the altar a year ago, still burdened by secrets and insecurities. They were something new, something stronger, something real. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the park, talking, laughing, and dreaming about the future. They spoke of their plans, their hopes, and the family they wanted to build together. Sarah shared her passion for painting, and James encouraged her, saying he couldn't wait to see her work displayed someday. They were a team, each invested in the other's dreams, and it felt like the beginning of a new, hopeful chapter. As the sun began to set, they walked home hand in hand, content and deeply connected. Their first year of marriage had tested them in ways they couldn't have anticipated, but those trials had only strengthened their love. They had faced their fears, their insecurities, and their doubts, and had come out on the other side with a newfound confidence in each other and in their future. That evening, back home, they celebrated with a simple dinner, just the two of them, surrounded by the warmth of their shared memories. And when they finally turned in for the night, Sarah lay beside James, feeling a peace that went beyond words. As she drifted off to sleep, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their love a constant, unwavering anchor. Their journey was only beginning, but they were ready, stronger than ever, ready to embrace every moment of the life they were building together. It wasn't a perfect story. It was real, it was flawed, and it was theirs. And that, she realized, was all they would ever need. If you enjoyed this story, pulse like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring videos. Thank you for watching.